Hello, my name is Trevor Hart, and this is my presentation for the English VPSS Tier 2 course. For my presentation, I wanted to focus on Fahrenheit 451, a novel by Ray Bradbury, first published in 1953. The reason I chose it is because it draws interesting parallels with contemporary popular culture and conveys a message about the necessity of knowledge's pursuit to create meaning in our lives. The dystopian world that Bradbury creates is a common theme within the literary period, and it is important to explore because it speaks to our current conditions and how we as a community can become better. There are three elements to consider within this context. First, the common narratives in this literary period. Second, the influences of the historical period on these narratives. And last, the protagonist of Fahrenheit 451, Guy Montag, who fits into the classical hero mold but also plays the ambiguity of narrative that is a convention of the literary period. First, let's look at the literary period itself. It's considered postmodern and contemporary, and it began around the year 1945 and continues to present day. Within this literary period, there was a blending of literary genres and styles and attempts to break free of modernist forms. It's crowded and varied, and there are multicultural authors from diverse cultures making their way into the scene. Also, the introduction of new media and new technology is revolutionary and brings with it many challenges. The impact and relevance of this particular period are too soon to tell. Authors that are included in this period, along with Ray Bradbury, are authors such as J.D. Salinger of Catcher in the Rye, John Grisham, who authored many contemporary crime fiction, and Michael Crichton, author of some science-based thrillers. For the purpose of this presentation, I'd like to focus on the novels Fahrenheit 451 and the other novels Brave New World in 1984 by Aldous Huxley and George Orwell, respectively. All three of these authors' works predicated narratives set in the future and were built based on each's contemporary events in recent history, and all had elements of a strained protagonist juxtaposed with an oppressive culture. In Fahrenheit 451, which is set in the near future, which would actually be our contemporary time, the world culture is obsessed with technology and entertainment to the point of saturation. Citizens are consumers, and they're encouraged to stay in motion, both physically and mentally. They watch loud, chaotic media sound bites, they race through the streets in cars, and they play full-contact sports. Very few take time to stop and observe the world, and the very few who do are considered odd or strange. This mass consumption of media leads to the absence of works of literature to the point where they become outlawed. There's a whole system put in place, including the firemen, to eradicate the existence of any such matter, and in very spectacular fashion. In this way, a status quo and equilibrium is maintained in which the population is happy in its pursuit of entertainment. Similarly, in Brave New World, controlled culture is maintained through reproductive technology. Population is limited in number to conserve resources, and there's a strict caste system with privileges and limitations. Also, in the novel 1984, control is maintained through technology, in which the population is monitored by Big Brother. That was the first occurrence of the term, and the population is also conditioned using a term called doublespeak. In both Fahrenheit 451 and in 1984, war or outer conflict is also a controlling factor. Let's take a look at the historical time period in which the narratives were written. So we are looking at a period of time just after World War II, a very tumultuous and hard time. It was a long and taxing conflict. It led to great advances in technology, a population boom, and within this we had seen lots of persecution, including the Nazi concentration camps in Germany, the internment of the Japanese in the United States, and actually the Japanese used their pilots as suicide bombers within the conflict. We also saw a large division into two factions ideologically throughout the world. We had communism and socialism on one hand, and on the other hand, Western democracy and capitalism on the other. These great strides in technology also came about, including the atomic bomb with nuclear energy, radar, sonar, and the earliest versions of the computer, as well as major improvements in manufacturing and building materials. These cultural, political, and material shifts had a profound effect on the literature of the period. Common themes included the power of the state over the individual, how much power the individual had or retained, the individual grappling with the speed of technical innovations and improvements, and what that meant to be human and pursue happiness or meaning. Also, the pitfalls or advantages of the advancing technology and how mature the human race would be in handling the power it had been granted. So moving on to the protagonist, inserted into this rich thematic landscape is Guy Montag. He's an example of the postmodern contemporary version of the classic hero in many ways. He is in constant contact with danger in his chosen occupation, and he also later makes choices that put him further at risk. He is impulsive and instinctive in nature, another hallmark of the classic hero. He's also a man of action, and he perseveres in very extreme circumstances. As a fireman, Guy Montag's chosen profession is dangerous in itself. He does not fight fires, he actually sets the fires. And when we are introduced to him, he is in the midst of doing just that, which is described in vivid detail. We also have a description of him later responding to another fire call in which he and his fellow firemen are preparing to set fire to an old woman's house when she ignites the flame herself in order to keep them from doing it to her. There's also his dramatic escape from his fellow firemen after he is made to burn his own house. He violently subdues Stoneman and Black, his fellow fireman, immolates his chief and destroys the mechanical hound before it can incapacitate him, then makes his dramatic escape. Further, there's the danger of the climactic event where his city, when he's outside of the city's bounds, is obliterated by enemy bombing. Montag also has the character attribute of being impulsive and instinctive rather than very thoughtful, as exemplified again by his escape from his fire captain and compatriots. Very little of his actions have been planned out, and we see small, impulsive actions that have larger consequences, such as how he steals books from crime scenes. To quote, Montag's hand closed like a mouth, crushed the book with wild devotion, with an insanity of mindlessness to his chest. Montag had done nothing. His hand had done it all. In these lines, Montag takes the book without thinking, without working through consciously the impact such an act might have in front of his peers. Indeed, he sees the action as something outside of himself. Obviously, he's also a man of action, persevering in extreme circumstances. As I had stated before, he subdues his teammates and captain to escape his death. Further into his escape, after he had been partially injected with chemicals by the mechanical hound, to quote, a shotgun blast went off in his leg every time he put it down. His whole leg was numb, and yet he forced himself to get up and continue his escape, running to his collaborator Faber's house, then into the river despite his incapacitation and the other's technological advancement. So, to conclude, Bradbury's tale is both affected by the period's history and recent events, and it's also precognitive in its depiction of a future society that in many ways parallels our own. It is also a cautionary tale, using the postmodernist anti-hero, Guy Montag, who also has very classical elements of the hero, to warn and give us hope that we will not lose our deeper meaning and purpose in the pursuit of mass entertainment and consumption. Montag is a symbol that we must remain cognizant of our past influences and remain vigilant that history is not lost.